Today's topic is how to give thanks. I want to start by asking you how you give thanks. What are some of the ways, how are some of the ways that you express your thanks to your friends, to your neighbors, and things like that? Raise your hand. Anybody want to share?
Hug and kisses.
Hugs and kisses? Okay, I love that one. Who else wants to share? How else do you give thanks?
Doing things for them.
Doing things for them. Okay, good. Like chores and things like that, or?
Whatever they need, whatever I can.
Okay, I love that. I love that. Who else wants to share? Anybody else want to share? You pray for them? Good. Anybody else? Huh? Just tell them thank you. Okay. Sometimes it's the simple things that we forget to go first, right? When we're thinking about thanking God, then how do we do it? Okay, you do your cross and you say, we glorify the name of God. Good. What else do we do? How we give thanks to God? Anybody? Light candles, Miss Victoria?
Keeping His commandments.
Keeping His commandments? Well, that's a good one. We give thanks to Him by keeping His commandments. Well, I want to give you a couple of reminders across human history how we as people have given thanks to God. And again, forgive my back, but because of the echo, we have to move further this way. So, the first one I'm going to bring is Genesis. You know, everything always begins at Genesis, right? In the beginning, so everything begins. It's not about baseball. That's not the big inning. It's the beginning. So, in Genesis, we have the first example after the first harvest of how we as human beings give thanks to God. Genesis chapter 4, verses 3 through 5. So, of course, this is after the fall of mankind. We're now outside the garden. And it says this: Now in the process of time, Cain brought a sacrifice to the Lord from the fruits of the ground. Abel also brought a sacrifice from the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. The Lord respected Abel and his offering, but He did not respect Cain and his sacrifices. So Cain was extremely sorrowful, and his countenance fell. So the very first example we see in the Scriptures of how we as human beings express our thanks to God is to make an offering to Him. Now, I don't recall if I have ever said this before, but I'm not a big fan of the word sacrifice. And that is because sacrifice, unfortunately, because of Hollywood, when we think of the word sacrifice, we think of throwing a virgin down the volcano, or we think, killing blood or something like that. But in truth, sacrifice, the word comes from the Latin to make sanctified, to make holy. It is an offering to God. And it doesn't have to include killing life. Because Cain and Abel offered sacrifices to God, and they offered their crops. And they offered, in Abel's case, the firstborn of his flock. So that was both a living sacrifice. They killed the lamb there, but also the fruits and vegetables. And so that's one of the reasons why sometimes, especially in the contemporary world, we hear the word sacrifice and we get a little confused. We can thank Hollywood for that. We can blame a lot of things on Hollywood, I guess. But so I like to use the word offering. We make an offering to God. And so Cain and Abel, to give their thanks to God, gave an offering to Him. Okay, and of course Abel gave of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat, meaning of the goodness. But we go further, and we also see Noah. What did Noah have to give thanks for? What was Noah so happy to give thanks for? Anybody know?
He was saved.
He was saved from the flood, right? That's a pretty good reason to thank God, right? Who knows what Noah did after the flood? Anybody know what Noah did after the flood to give thanks to God? I'm going to tell you, so it's okay. Genesis chapter 8, verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to God and took every clean animal and every clean bird and offered whole burnt offerings on the altar. Noah built a church. Noah built a place to worship God. And in his case, it was a whole burnt offering. And in the ancient world, in the Old Testament world, the whole burnt offering was when they took something like the calf, in the Greek olakoftomata, and they would put it on the altar and they would burn it until there was nothing left. And the understanding was that what was consumed by the fire was received by God. Okay, it was quite literally a gift to God. It was consumed in the fire and God received it. Then let's go to Abraham. Abraham and his first victory over the king, what is the first thing Abraham did to give thanks to God? Anybody know? Boy, we really have to work on our Old Testament, right? Well, he didn't sacrifice his son yet. I'll read it to you. Now Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Does that sound familiar? Bread and wine? He blessed Abraham and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hands." Then Abram gave a tithe of all that he had. So Melchizedek, who is Jesus Christ, by the way, came down and celebrated with bread and wine. What do you think that was? Holy Communion. And what was Abraham's response? To give 10% of everything he had to God. So one excellent way, according to the scriptures, is we come and we celebrate Holy Communion, we celebrate the divine liturgy, and we tithe. We give 10% to God directly from the Old Testament as a way that we have always, throughout history, expressed our thanks to God. And then we have Jacob. Genesis chapter 3, verses 19 and 20. When Jacob was reunited with his family, then he bought a parcel of land where he pitched his tent from Hamor, Shechen's father, and for 100 male lambs. There he set an altar and called on the God of Israel. So the point I'm trying to make is that we don't just say thank you to God. We express our gratitude in our worshiping Him, this beautiful cathedral. And we, as it says many times in the Old Testament, you can look over and over in the Old Testament, they built an altar to God, a place to worship Him. And the altar specifically was a place to offer things to Him. And in the Old Testament, they offered many things to God. They didn't just offer animals, they offered bread, they offered wine, they offered oil, they offered the different crops and things like that. They offered a little bit of everything they had. And Abraham, what does he do? He gives 10% of everything to God just to say thank you. Just to say thank you. And so now we get to the New Testament, and we understand now, thinking of the Old Testament, there was a particular kind of offering, a particular kind of sacrifice. Remember I mentioned the whole burnt offering? That's the part that God takes it all. There were two other kinds of sacrifices. There were the sacrifices of thanks, and even in the Old Testament, the sacrifices of communion, where they would cook, let's say, the turtle dove, or they would cook the lamb or the bull on the altar. The part that was burnt off, God consumed, and then the person making the offering would eat from that cooked meat, and they were communing with God. From the same offering, God received some, and the person who was making the offering received some. And it was a communion of sorts, as an expression to give thanks to God. So everything we say here, we do things for them. We give them hugs and kisses. We say thank you. We glorify His name. All of these things are true. But the beautiful part is that we do it with God, connected to God, in communion with Him. And that's why, what did Christ establish before He went up on the cross? We sometimes call it the Last Supper. Of course, in Orthodoxy, we call it the mystical supper. We don't call it the Last Supper, we call it the mystical supper, because it is actually the first celebration of Holy Communion as we know it. And it was, we say in Greek, Theeucharistia, the divine thanksgiving. And so we bring to the church, what do we bring when we come to church? What are some of the things we bring when we come to church? Raise your hands. Anybody? Bread and wine. Somebody said prosfero over here. Prosfero. What else do we bring when we come to church? Oil, right? We have the oil candelia that people bring the oil. What else do we bring to church? Huh? Money. We bring an offering to God, don't we? When we come into the narthex, that's part of the tithe. Someday I'm going to talk about tithing. I'm not going to do it today. But someday I'm going to talk about tithing, because it's something that we should be much better at as Greek Orthodox Christians. But we do. We bring money, just like Abraham. Abraham gave 10% of everything he had to God as an expression of thanks. You're missing one more thing. What do we bring when we come into church? Ourselves. Who said it over here? See that? You weren't even seeing my clue over on this side. We bring ourselves. And we celebrate Theeucharistia, the holy thanksgiving. And we offer, what time is it? I don't want to lose time now. We're good. We offer the bread and wine to God. And He offers it back changed. And what does it become? The body and blood of Christ. And if we remember, in the upper room, Christ said, "Take, eat, this is my body, this is my blood." And the service, if you were to look back into the Old Testament, is the communion service and the Thanksgiving service from the Old Testament. The reason we talk about, of course, this is Thanksgiving week. And many of us are going to be gathered around our table, and many of us are going to have either a family is coming over to our house, or we're going over to someone's house. We're going to be extended family, parapano. Sometimes, it's a little chaotic because there's 25 kids running around the kitchen table, right? Yeah. All these things is part of our Thanksgiving, and we understand that. But unfortunately, we have lost what our ancestors had. Nowhere did we read in the Old Testament that they gave thanks to God merely by gorging themselves on a feast. They didn't give thanks to God watching football. Nothing against football, but it's not what Thanksgiving is all about. And so we're very blessed. We have liturgy on Thanksgiving Day. We have the ultimate opportunity to come as the ancient people of God, as our ancestors did before us, to come and begin our day of thanks by celebrating Holy Communion, by celebrating the Divine Liturgy, and bringing ourselves. And we know that, of course, in the ancient church, when they would come into the narthex, they would drop off their food and their bread and their wine, and they would even bring their clothing and things for the poor when they would come to liturgy. Now, we don't do that here yet, but it should be part of our way of giving thanks, that when we come to the church, we bring for those who are in need, right? So let's start this year for Thanksgiving. I know it's going to be difficult, especially for those of you who are cooking, because I'm not going to say that we shouldn't have our feasts. Our feasts are good. Liturgy is a feast. But if it is possible for you to get away for 1 hour on Thursday morning, come and begin Thanksgiving in the Divine Liturgy. The holy thanks, Ithi Eucharistia. Fast, do your prayers, and take and receive Holy Communion as our ancestors did, as a way to say thank you to God. And then go about your day in some kind of gratitude. But gratitude has to be something beyond ourselves. If Thanksgiving is only a time for us to sit around a table and feast and celebrate ourselves when so many around us are suffering, then we're really not giving thanks to God, we're just thanking ourselves. We have a couple minutes for questions. Any questions? Yes? No? Yes?
Being that we love God and love our church and we bring our babies in at 40 days, would that be considered kind of like an offering of our love for bringing our children to us?
Yeah, so when we bring our children to the church, definitely is an act of love. I would say, I would take it one step further, and there are some parents, in a literal way, give their children to the church. My mother gave me to the church, right? And so, in many cases, the family of the priests and the nuns and the monks, you know, whole families have given people to serve the church. You know, we see, for example, in St. Basil's family, his yaya is a saint, his mother's a saint, his sister's a saint, his brother's a saint. The entire family have given themselves to the church as an expression to love for God, not just, again, to just walk in the doors and have a nice prosevchi and be done with it, right? To give our entire life. St. Paul says that we should give ourselves as a living sacrifice, that everything we should do should be a gift to God as an expression of our thanks and the wonderful things He's given us. But yes, wonderful. To bring our children and to bless them is a great way to give our thanks to God, especially after a difficult pregnancy or something, as a mother to say, thank you, God, I'm going to bring my child now to be blessed, to give thanks to God. That's beautiful, beautiful. Any other questions about Thanksgiving? I will close by saying this. I know that we're in the fast, but here in America, ever since the 1950s, I think it is, we Greek Orthodox Christians have been given an exemption on Thanksgiving Day from fasting. So we can eat turkey. It doesn't mean we can gorge ourselves with turkey, But we have been given the blessing by our bishops to have turkey on Thanksgiving Day, recognizing that our country gives thanks to God on that day. It is the one day left in our nation's history that we're actually giving thanks to God. So our bishops have told us that it's okay for us to have meat, to have turkey on Thanksgiving. One holy man said to me once, if we refuse, I know some people refuse to eat turkey on Thanksgiving because it's the fast. He says we have to be very careful that we're not being prideful. Look at me, I'm eating tofuti or whatever the imitation things are. We have to be very careful not to be prideful, because our pride robs us of any benefit that the fasting might have. So enjoy a Thanksgiving meal, but first come for liturgy. And then for those of you who are able, we're going to be feeding the poor that day in Father Tryphon Hall. And they're going to have a beautiful Thanksgiving meal that Mr. Palaidis has prepared for everybody. So if you're able to participate and help and serve, or even just show fellowship to those who are struggling around us, as a way, again, doing things for people, as a way that we express our gratitude and our thanks to God. Okay, I hope that helps a little bit for a wonderful Thanksgiving. It's going to be a great day for all of us, a whole week of giving thanks. There is no school this week, so our Goya is doing different things. The various ministries, Philoptochos is bringing, I don't know how many, they're preparing meals for I don't know how many families. So a lot of wonderful things are happening this week for us to give thanks to God by serving other people. As we said in the sermon, all the good things we have received from God, they're not for us, but they're given to us so we can bless others with them, and so we can be a blessing to other people. Have a beautiful Thanksgiving.